Hey, everybody. Welcome back. We're going to be diving into something pretty important today.
Yeah.
It's the history of housing for Black Americans,
Uh-huh.
and specifically how a lot of government policies have shaped where people live and also the inequality that comes along with that.
Right.
We're going to be focusing on this video from The Root on YouTube
Okay.
called Racial Segregation and Concentrated Poverty, the History of Housing in Black America.
Mm-hmm.
And, just to give you a little teaser, we're even going to talk about how, like, the construction of interstate highways
Oh, wow.
played a role in all of this.
Interesting.
So to help us break this down, we have our expert here to give us some historical context.
Well, it's interesting how before the Great Migration,
Yeah.
Black Americans in major cities weren't really heavily segregated.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they were pretty much spread throughout.
Okay.
Then millions fled the Jim Crow South, looking for better lives in the North and the West.
Right.
And this huge shift kind of prompted a reaction from the government. And it wasn't exactly a welcoming one.
Oh.
Yeah.
So what do you think were the underlying motivations behind the government's response to this migration? Were they genuinely unprepared for the influx? Or was there something else at play?
I think the response was all about containment.
Okay.
Keeping Black communities separate.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the government, especially HUD, they used tools like racially restrictive covenants.
Oh.
These were agreements that literally barred Black people from buying homes in certain areas.
Can you imagine that?
Yeah, so it's like a legal document saying you can't live here because of your race.
Wow.
And then they also used redlining,
Right.
labeling entire neighborhoods as hazardous for loans based solely on their racial makeup.
So this wasn't just like prejudice. This was just
This was policy
way.
built into the system itself.
So the government was actively promoting segregation.
Yeah.
And this brings us to urban renewal projects.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about how those actually made the problem worse?
So urban renewal, or as James Baldwin called it, Negro removal.
Right.
Can you imagine your entire neighborhood being bulldozed?
It's crazy.
Families forced to leave their homes.
Yeah.
Businesses shut down.
Yeah.
And like you said earlier, the construction of interstate highways played a role in this too.
Okay, I have to admit, I'm still trying to wrap my head around how highways and housing segregation are connected.
Well, think about it this way. The interstate highway system was being built during this same time period.
Yeah.
And guess what? A lot of these highways were routed right through vibrant Black neighborhoods,
Oh, wow.
splitting them apart,
Just...
destroying community bonds and displacing even more people.
So they were tearing down homes and communities, and they were saying it was for the greater good.
Right.
But really, it was pushing Black families out and further segregating cities.
Exactly.
That's awful.
Yeah, and a really stark example of this is in Miami, Interstates 95 and 395, they cut right through Overtown. This historically Black neighborhood. It was actually once known as Colored Town.
Really?
So picture like a thriving community full of life and culture, and then highways just slice right through it.
Wow.
Scattering people and businesses.
That's insane.
Yeah. And this wasn't an isolated incident. This happened all over the country.
Oh, my gosh.
It's pretty clear that these infrastructure projects were often used as tools for segregation.
So it was a systematic dismantling of these communities piece by piece.
Pretty much.
And this wasn't just about physical displacement.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
It feels like these actions were all part of a larger system to keep Black Americans at a disadvantage.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
The government invested billions of dollars over decades to create and maintain segregated housing and concentrated poverty.
It's just like each institution of oppression in our history morphed into another one.
Right.
Slavery, then Jim Crow, and then this system of housing segregation.
Exactly.
All contributing to the ongoing legacy of inequality. So the Black ghetto, as it's been called, becomes this lasting symbol of systemic racism.
Yeah.
It's not something that just happened naturally.
No.
This was the result of deliberate actions.
Yeah. A powerful concept.
It really is.
It is.
So did any presidential administrations ever try to address this legacy?
Well, every administration inherits this legacy.
Right.
And, some have tried to address it.
Right.
For example, President Biden signed an executive order in 2022 specifically aimed at tackling historical racism in housing policy.
Okay, so Biden's executive order, that aimed to tackle this history of racism in housing.
Right.
But some people argue that it doesn't really go far enough.
Yeah.
What do you think? Is this like a genuine step towards real change?
I mean,
or more of a symbolic gesture?
I think it's definitely part of a broader push for racial equity. He actually signed 4 orders focused on that.
Oh, wow.
But whether it leads to tangible change, I guess, remains to be seen.
Right.
It's important to remember that the Fair Housing Act of 1968, passed after MLK's assassination, was also supposed to address segregation.
Yeah.
And yet
here we are.
Yeah.
Still dealing with the fallout of these policies.
Yeah, despite some progress, segregation persists. And in fact, economic segregation has increased since 1970.
Really?
Yeah. That American dream of homeownership is slipping further out of reach for many, particularly the Black poor.
Especially with housing prices, what they are these days.
Yeah. In 1980, just to achieve even integration in metropolitan areas, a staggering 8 out of 10 Black people would have had to move.
Wow. That's
crazy.
Those are some sobering statistics.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here? What are some potential solutions to actually dismantle these systems of inequality?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is.
And unfortunately, there's no easy answer.
Yeah.
There's no single solution that will magically fix everything.
Right.
But it starts with acknowledging the problem, understanding the history, and recognizing that these issues are deeply systemic.
Right.
We can't just treat the symptoms.
Right.
We have to get to the root causes.
So we can't just like slap a Band-Aid on a gaping wound.
Exactly.
We need a fundamental shift in how we approach housing and equality in our country.
I agree.
And I think a key part of that involves challenging our own assumptions and biases.
Yeah.
And being willing to confront these uncomfortable truths.
It's tough.
About our past and even about ourselves.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
It's about having those difficult conversations.
Yeah.
Even when they feel awkward or challenging.
Absolutely.
And it's about truly listening to and learning from those who have been directly impacted by these systems of oppression.
Right.
Their experiences and perspectives are invaluable.
Couldn't agree more.
So it's not just about changing policies.
No.
It's about changing hearts and minds. It's about creating a society that truly values equity and justice for all.
I think that's the goal.
It really is.
Yeah.
So that brings us to, I think, a really crucial question.
Okay.
What are some concrete actions that individuals can take to make a difference? What can we do right now in our own communities?
Well, there are so many ways to get involved.
Yeah.
It all starts with education.
Oh, yeah.
So learn about the history of housing discrimination in your own community, research local organizations working on these issues, and find ways to support their efforts.
Okay.
Even something as simple as attending a community meeting or volunteering your time can make a difference.
So get informed.
Yeah.
Get connected and get active.
Absolutely.
But I imagine that real change is going to take more than individual actions.
It will.
What about collective action?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Throughout history, movements for social change have gained momentum from the collective power of people demanding justice and equality.
Absolutely.
Think about the civil rights movement, the fight for fair housing. These were fueled by ordinary individuals coming together to challenge oppressive systems.
It's incredibly inspiring to see the power of people uniting for a common cause.
Yeah.
And using their collective voice to push for a more just and equitable society.
It really is powerful.
I'd love to hear more about how community organizing and activism have played a role in the fight for housing equity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We'll dive into that right after a quick break. It really is a sobering reality.
Yeah, it's crazy how all these policies that were put in place to create segregated neighborhoods had a ripple effect that extended far beyond just where people lived.
Totally. I mean, it affected everything.
Right, like access to good education, healthcare, job opportunities, even their exposure to environmental hazards.
Absolutely. Segregation basically created this system where Black communities were just systematically disadvantaged.
Right.
And these disadvantages have just been passed down for generations.
It's like this cycle of inequality.
It is this cycle
that's almost impossible to break.
It's tough.
And, it really distorts that whole idea of the American dream, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that classic idea that anyone can achieve success through hard work and determination.
Right.
It kind of falls apart when you have these systems in place that are intentionally limiting opportunities for entire groups of people.
Right. That dream becomes a lot harder to achieve when the playing field is tilted against you from the very beginning.
Exactly.
And when you consider that homeownership is often seen as like the cornerstone of that dream.
Yeah.
a way to build wealth and stability.
Totally.
It makes the legacy of housing discrimination even more profound.
It does.
It's not just about where you live.
Right.
It's about your ability to fully participate in the economic and social fabric of our country.
I agree.
So we've talked about the history, the policies, the devastating effects. But what can actually be done to change this system?
Right.
Is there any hope for real progress?
I mean, that's the million-dollar question.
It really is.
And there's no easy answer.
Right.
No single solution that's just going to fix everything.
Yeah.
But I think it starts with acknowledging the problem.
Okay.
Understanding the history. Recognizing that these issues are deeply systemic.
So we can't just treat the symptoms.
We can't.
We have to get to the root causes.
Exactly.
We can't just slap a Band-Aid on a gaping wound.
Right.
We need a fundamental shift in how we approach housing and equality in our country.
I agree.
And a key part of that involves challenging our own assumptions and biases.
For sure.
Being willing to confront uncomfortable truths about our past.
Yeah.
And even about ourselves.
Absolutely.
It's about having those difficult conversations.
Yeah, it is.
Even when they feel awkward or challenging.
Yeah.
And it's about truly listening to and learning from those who have been directly impacted by these systems of oppression. Their experiences and perspectives are so valuable.
Couldn't agree more.
It's not just about changing policies.
No, it's not.
It's about changing hearts and minds.
It is.
It's about creating a society that truly values equity and justice for all.
I think that's the goal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that brings us to a really crucial question.
Okay.
What are some concrete actions that individuals can take to make a difference? What can we do right now in our own communities?
There are so many ways to get involved.
Yeah.
It all starts with education.
Okay.
Learn about the history of housing discrimination in your own community. Research local organizations working on these issues and find ways to support their efforts.
Okay.
Even something as simple as attending a community meeting or volunteering your time can make a difference.
So get informed, get connected, and get active.
Absolutely.
But I imagine real change is going to take more than just individual actions.
Yeah.
What about collective action?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Throughout history, movements for social change have gained momentum from the collective power of people.
Right.
Demanding justice and equality.
Yeah.
Think about the civil rights movement.
Right.
The fight for fair housing. These were fueled by ordinary individuals coming together to challenge these oppressive systems.
It's so inspiring to see the power of people uniting for a common cause.
It is.
And using their collective voice to push for a more just and equitable society.
It's really powerful.
I'd love to hear more about how community organizing and activism have played a role in the fight for housing equity.
Absolutely. We can dive into that now.
Okay, so we're back.
Yeah.
And ready to wrap up our deep dive into this complex issue of housing in America.
Yep.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah, for sure.
From the intentional creation of segregated neighborhoods to the ongoing fight for equity. Before the break, you were telling us about the power of community organizing in addressing these challenges.
Right. You can't underestimate the impact of grassroots movements. When people actually band together and demand change, it can really shift the landscape. We've seen this throughout history. The civil rights movement, the fight for fair housing. Countless examples where ordinary individuals came together and challenged the status quo. And when it comes to housing equity, there are so many inspiring stories of community organizations and leaders who are out there making a difference.
Can you give us some examples of what that looks like in action? Like, what are some of the specific things that these groups are doing to fight for housing justice?
Yeah, they're doing everything from advocating for affordable housing policies and fighting discriminatory lending practices to empowering communities to actually have a say in what happens in their own neighborhoods.
Wow.
They're organizing tenants' rights groups, running legal aid clinics, creating community land trusts to ensure long-term affordability. They're also working to educate the public about these issues, mobilize people to take action.
It's good to hear about these efforts.
It is.
It really highlights that change is possible.
Yeah.
Even when we're dealing with these systems that are so entrenched.
Right. It's a fight that requires constant vigilance. And action.
Yeah. So as we wrap up,
I
want to leave our listeners with a final question to think about. Given everything that we've learned about the history of housing in America, the systemic issues at play, what actions can we take
Mm-hmm.
at the local or national level
Yeah.
to dismantle these systems of inequality
Right.
and create genuinely equal housing opportunities for all Americans?
That's a really important question.
It is.
And it's one that we all need to be thinking about and acting on.
Absolutely.
You know, the fight for housing equity is far from over.
Right.
It's going to require all of our ongoing engagement,
Mm-hmm.
our education, and our commitment to creating a more just future.
Well, this has been a really insightful conversation.
It has.
We've delved into the complexities of housing policy,
Yeah.
the historical injustices
Mhm.
that have shaped our communities,
Right.
and the really inspiring efforts of those working towards a more equitable future.
Absolutely.
So thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And to all our listeners out there, keep asking those tough questions.
Yes.
Keep pushing for change.
Yeah.
And never stop believing in the power of collective action to create a more just world for everyone.
Couldn't have said it better myself.